Welcome to Church Without Borders. I'm Michelle McNamara,
And I'm Paige Wolfinger.
and our text is Transfiguration, at least from Matthew's Gospel. And we have that because this is the last Sunday in the season of Epiphany, and then we'll be moving into Lent.
I know. Can you believe it that we're already
No,
in Lent practically? Wow.
I cannot. But I will take the text, read it today. So from Matthew 17, we're going to start at the 17th chapter, but verse 1. It says, 6 days later, doesn't tell us later than what, but 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and his brother John, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell on the ground, and they were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, Get up and do not be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. And the text ends there. No, it doesn't. We do the 9th verse.
Sorry about that. 9th verse.
As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, Tell no one about this vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. Now we end here, because that's the 9th verse. There we are. Ta-da! So, I feel like it should be a drum roll. Ta-da. All right. So, when you have a story, you have to be able to kind of identify with a character, one of the main characters, to really come into a story. Who are you identifying with here?
I really don't know. This is so far out of anything that I could understand as an experience that I'm not really sure who I identify with.
Well, that's it, right? So when you have a good story, you've got characters that'll have a quality that either you have in common, right? Something that you share, or something you really would like, and so you would strive toward it, or there's an entry point, something that you can come in and say, yeah, and we have to preach this every year, right? And so we come to this story, and as I'm looking, this is okay, this story, and we enter in, and I think, how, right? Because when you're coming at this, right, how do we identify with Jesus? How do we identify with Elijah and identify with, and so, there's the entry point with Jesus. Okay, well, identify with Jesus in terms of his humanity. Well, okay, and we got Peter, James, and John for that as well, and got Moses for that. So I'm just trying to find those entry points where we can come in and say, so where is our point of entry? How do we get a hold of this story and have it be something that really, really works, not just as story, but as narrative?
That's exactly
right?
that's exactly my struggle with this piece of scripture whenever we come upon it. Is it seems to me like it's something that happened to Jesus with the disciples, and it's kind of their experience. And it's hard to take the lesson that we're supposed to take when they come down the mountain. I'm not really sure at all times what the point of this is. There might be a point of entry.
Yep.
And I was again reading a commentary earlier, and the writer was mentioning that immediately preceding this in chapter 16, Jesus had said to his disciples, "Truly I tell you, some of you standing here today will not die until you see the Son of Man come with his kingdom. All right. Now, for a long time, the very first church rendered that to mean that they thought Jesus was coming back, as we like to say, a week from Tuesday, literally. And so they thought that the first apostles wouldn't die until Jesus came again. And this commentator was saying, no, maybe Jesus was actually referencing what was about to happen. And what was about to happen was Jesus in conversation with the law and the prophets. The law and the prophets. The kingdom was coming, and it is that relationship with what came before that is embodied in Jesus in the kingdom. And so I think that there might be a way to latch onto that, because of course Moses is the recognition, the symbol of the law, Elijah the symbol of the prophets, and both of those together are everything that came before, the whole history of God with the people. And I think there might be something there
It's worth wrestling with.
that we can begin to kind of grapple with as a place to enter in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What were you thinking? Did you have a
Well, I didn't necessarily. It was a good question. Is what I had was a good question. So, and some of the commentaries that I was reading just had a take that it was Jesus never asked that his disciples see him in his glory, right? That much like you were saying, this is something that happened to him, right? And in say nothing about this until after the resurrection, right? What Jesus asked of his disciples was that they would do the hard work of discipleship, that they would see him do the work, that they would see and be there in the midst of the suffering. So that these are things that were asked, but he didn't ask that they see this glory and all the, shining, magnificent moments. To the shiny happy people, right? So that those were not things that were asked. The other things, the difficult moments, those were asked. And so there's, for me, right, that kind of that way of entering in to say, I'm not asking you to see the glory. And that's just one of the ways of distinguishing between that which is authentic Jesus stuff, authentic, or just maybe authentic, because we see so much of those attention getters, right? Look at me, look at me, look at me. And all of that is about all the shiny good stuff. And that's not any of the stuff that Jesus was really asking. No, go. Yeah.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about this again, and you're
Sure.
going to be irritated because it's all I've been talking about
Okay.
since Sunday.
Oh, yeah, all right.
But Sunday during the Super Bowl, of course, notably, there were 2 ads that ran
Yeah.
from the He Gets Us campaign.
Mhm.
And a number of things that seem to irritate people that are on my Facebook feed. One of them was that Jesus was never one for that kind of look at me, look at me, look at me. That's exactly the point.
Mhm.
Not one to stand up and say, aren't I the one that you should be paying attention to? Jesus just went about the work and did what needed to be done. And I think that that's one of the pieces that irritated people on my feed. There were a lot of other pieces too, and we could talk about that if you wanted to. But I think that was part of it too. They're like, Jesus never had a slick advertising campaign. He didn't have anybody that was his hype man that went, he simply did what he needed to do.
Yeah.
And that's the authentic Jesus. That's the picture of Messiah that so scandalized everybody. Precisely. That's the point of it all. So yes, I know. I'm sorry I brought that up again, but yeah, it's
fine.
yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is really interesting is the lectionary pairs this particular reading. And at least in my church on Sunday, we're also going to be reading from the little bit in Exodus that tells about Moses going up the mountain to get the law. right? And that when he came down, his face glowed so much from simply being in contact with the divine and receiving the law. It's not just being in contact with God, it was the reception of the law that when he came down the mountain, his face glowed and he terrified people. And so he had to veil himself. Um, and uh, and I think that Matthew again is trying to make a connection here for his readers, or who we at least believe his readers to be, and we will never really know that now, will we?
No.
But to make that connection between Jesus and the law, that Jesus is not again coming to abolish the law. That's something that we talked about recently in the and the end of the Beatitudes. I have not come to abolish the law. He came to fulfill it. And Matthew wants to make that connection really clear that he is in the direct line of Moses and Elijah and all of those who came before.
And everything that Moses does, Jesus does
Yeah.
in Matthew's gospel.
Right.
So that's why up a mountain
Yep.
and all these sorts of things.
Yep.
And it's for those who are lovely, biblically geeky, right? That the fact that Moses is here is not insignificant, right? Because that means in some way Moses, of course, is embraced by God, right? And not cut off. So that's not an insignificant piece for people to note. And along those biblically geeky lines, this is the first time, at least in Matthew's gospel, that lovely select group, right? So he takes with
The
him
inner
Peter,
circle.
James, and John, at least what we call the inner circle, right? He takes them off on their own. So we see them again go to Gethsemane, but this is that first pulling in Matthew's gospel where they go with him and something significant happens. So, that's something of a journey here that they're taking, and they see something that the others don't, and they have to keep it a secret. So, okay, at least for a short time.
Yeah.
This is the 24th chapter, so it's not
Not terribly long. Yeah.
So you got 2 chapters to keep it a secret, but
Yeah.
So there's that.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Also interesting to me in this piece. So there's those echoes of Moses.
Mhm.
Excuse me, that everything that Moses does, Jesus does, and that includes going up the mountain and then coming back down with this shining visage and all of that other stuff. This is also a throwback to the story of his baptism, right?
Mhm.
That once again, what happened at his baptism happens here as well, that the heavens open and a voice speaks and says, "This is my son,
Right.
the beloved." And this time, the voice also says, "Listen to him." Right? The understanding that he is got more to say. We we in the United Church of Christ have this wonderful phrase that we use, God is still speaking. And that is very clear in this particular moment, that there is still light to break forth, and Jesus is going to be the one who shares that light, and that there is wisdom and there is life in what he says, and that those who would like to access that need to follow him, and listen to him, listen to what he has to say. And Matthew spends a fair amount of time on Jesus as the teacher. And some of the greatest little bits that we have of Jesus teaching come from the Gospel of Matthew. I'm talking too fast and I stumbled over myself. But I love that there's also that very baptismal moment relived and re-examined up at the top of the mountain. And I think that that's significant as well too. Matthew wants us to make those connections.
Absolutely.
Right.
And the whole season of Epiphany is that baptismal piece. So we start off Epiphany with the baptism, right, of Jesus, and how that is something that we're to pay attention to. And those words, "This is my son, the beloved." And then we close this Epiphany season with this transfiguration and those words, "This is my son, but listen to him." And you can't help but see the bookend if you're paying attention to how that works. But then that, excuse me, that the transfiguration, right, and how that works. And for me, it ties into, right, do not be um, conformed to this world, but be transformed, right,
Mm.
with the renewing of your mind. And so all of that, I think, is not just a coincidence that we see all of those pieces that are there and how we are to be in a discipleship relationship. Because, I mean, we're not going to be transfigured, but we are to be transformed in our relationships. And how are we to do that? And be transformed in the renewing of your mind, and be transformed, but not be conformed this way, and how all of those things come together. So, and we do that not just day by day, but season by season. And so the Epiphany season draws to a close, the Lenten season opens up, and we're invited to engage in certain activities as the Lenten season opens. And we're getting ahead of ourselves that way. But um, when you live your life in the church, you're trying to see how each season something is marked, so season by season.
Mhm.
So not just a life season, but a church season, and what that has meant. So
I related to that,
yeah,
I was putting together the Ash Wednesday service for my congregation and found a really lovely communion service for Ash Wednesday that begins at the font. It begins at the baptismal font. And as people come forward to receive communion on Ash Wednesday, they touch the water and are reminded that they are a baptized people on a journey. And I think, again, this is somebody who's been paying attention to the scripture that leads us directly into Lent. That Epiphany begins and ends with these baptismal stories. And in order to remind us who we are, it's easy to, when you come into a season such as Lent, I think, it's a little bit easy sometimes to forget that we are beloved, to
Mhm.
forget that we are created in the divine image, to forget that we have a companion that walks with us through the wilderness, and to come through the baptismal font is to remember those things before you start the journey. And I think that that's very clearly what's happening with this story as well.
Mhm.
Right before Jesus is taking that trip into Jerusalem, he's also remembering his baptism and is being cheered and encouraged and strengthened, and all of those things that need to happen as he takes those steps into Jerusalem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And are there ways that this story is meant to fall along those lines? To encourage, to cheer
Mm.
on, and I don't know the answer to that. I haven't even thought to look at it in that way.
Mhm.
And if that's the case, why would only a small group of disciples have seen it or known about it? So that I don't know. But if it's meant that way, if it's meant for Jesus as a bit of encouragement from, we've asked this question as you read the Book of Joy, right?
Mhm.
So if you are the Dalai Lama, or if you are um, Bishop Tutu, right?
Right.
Exactly who else would you find as a peer, right? Because once you reach a certain kind of spiritual status, you're like, okay, who do you reach out to, who you can connect with? So, okay, if you're Jesus, who else do you have? Well, Elijah and Moses. Okay,
Okay.
so
Well,
there's your peers, and so if you need to have a private consultation before you walk into Jerusalem, maybe there it is. And so, I don't know. Um,
that's actually a really powerful thought. Right? We're told in the story that they stood apart and conversed, right?
mhm,
There's no mention of what that conversation was about,
yeah,
but that's a really powerful thought. I'm gonna have to sit with that one for a while, but I kind of like it that there's this.
would only be a pretend anything in our heads anyway. We'll never know. But
Exactly, but I think there's still value in that, and a reminder for us too, as we're entering into difficult seasons, that we don't do it alone,
Mhm.
and that we have a community that is there to support us as we go.
That at least makes it relatable as a story.
It does.
Right? We can
Right.
enter in
Right.
that way, but and the joke the memes that'll start coming along, just how did they know that it was Moses and Elijah, right? Did somebody have pictures in their wallets they could refer to, or like, how do you know that that's exactly what that's, there could be, drawings on the synagogue walls. We don't know, right? There are these representations. And so we take their words for it that that's exactly who that was. So that's all I got for that. But this is for me just it's a sermon that I have preached certainly every year I've been in ministry. So what, 30, I don't know, too long. But every year I come into this and just go, okay, give me something to preach on with this, because it's tricky.
Mhm.
It's tricky to come in and say, how do you make something from this? And every year there's something, which means clearly this is a richer story than every year I shallowly try to see, but it's difficult. So,
I think it is one of the more difficult texts that we run across, again, because it is so other
mhm,
than our experience.
yeah.
And that makes it tricky, and it makes it a little bit hard. Um,
Is
but
it,
oh no, I'm sorry. Go
yeah,
ahead.
I was gonna say, is that possibly just the point?
Maybe that is. Hmm. Maybe that is.
Perhaps we've made the other texts too ordinary. And so we get this one because we need something that is truly other, extraordinary, to make us reach further.
Remember,
Yeah.
remember who he is, and
Mhm.
and what exactly that means. So
Mm.
I think there are a couple different ways to lean into this.
Mm.
The other one that I really like to think about is they have gone up the mountain, they have received the law and the prophets,
Mhm.
and now you were hinting at this before, but they come down to enact it,
Yeah.
right? You can't stay on the mountain with these commands that are about engaging with other people in justice
Mm.
and equity and grace. You have to actually come down the mountain and do the work. That's what it's all about.
Mhm.
It's not a story about I'm in this to get to my own personal heaven where I can hang out forever and be happy.
Mm.
It's about learning what is right and good so that we can expand that in the world. And I think that that's a really important piece to this as well. That it wasn't enough to stay there in the glory.
Right.
You got to come back and do the work, because it's about being in relationship with other people
Mhm.
and doing what the law requires, which is justice, kindness, humility.
Mhm. Well, when they get down the mountain, the first thing they have to do is heal, right? It's like
Right.
they encounter this. Whoa, yeah, we need your help right now.
Yeah.
And it's like, there it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Forget the booths, man. Get to work.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And it's like that we go on vacation. What are you doing, kid? Oh, yeah. I like that.
Exactly.
Mhm. That's exactly it. So I interrupted. You were about to say something when I jumped in with maybe that's the point. I didn't mean to take away your words or.
I have no idea what that was now. So
Okay.
sorry.
See what happens? I interrupt you and your thought is gone. I'm so sorry. That's my.
Obviously, it was very important and theologically weighty. Yeah.
Yeah.
If it was able to be blown away by a little disruption. But,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry. Right. Anything else we want to say about, I mean, I know we haven't really said a lot.
Actually, I feel like we have said a lot. We have connected this story to Moses and Elijah.
Uh-huh.
We have connected it to the law and the prophets. We have talked about that baptismal piece. And we have talked about the fact that this is not just heady theology. It is about doing, in a lot of different ways. And so I think that there's a lot that is part and parcel to the story. And it's an important reminder to us also as we come into this story of Jesus coming into Jerusalem, of the real trial that Jesus is going to undergo. So yeah, I think all of that is worthwhile. So I stand opposed to your saying we didn't say anything. I think we covered
You said a lot.
nicely.
See? So listen to us, not just Jesus. Wow. Chutzpah.
I know. Listen
Man.
to us. Oy, wait for the lightning to fall.
Absolutely. So along those listen to lines, I mean, Jesus says, we lectionary wise, right? We've just finished the Sermon on the Mount. And so there's a lot there that needed to be listened to. Now that was several chapters before, right? Because this is 17 and that was in, Matthew 5. But I think there's something deliberately paired for those who laid out the gospel. If you're supposed to listen to Jesus, and then he's got a lot he's going to say in the Lenten season. So there's it. But so if we've said enough, we've said enough, and there it is. And thank you for tuning in. And there'll be a lot more to hear in the Lenten season. So thank you for joining us. God's blessings with you. Take care.
Be well.